Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagano. We are back here in Studio 130 for a beautiful Friday summer afternoon. I'm joined in studio with everyone's favorite John Hendrickson, and he is ready. He is locked and loaded today. He's got articles printed out.
That's right.
He's got notes written. He's done national TV interviews already today, so it's either going to be one big letdown or it's going to be one for the ages, John. I don't know what you got ready for us. So, okay. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good. This is a good way to end the week.
Yeah.
It's we'll get this going. Okay, I'm going to throw you a gigantic curveball right out of the gate. Okay. Are you familiar? I got to get this right. With the Battelle National Biodefense. Yeah, you've never heard of that organization?
Never heard of that.
Okay, well, the thing that's going, and I probably should have prefaced this by, John, you're a new Twitter user, right?
Not yet. I haven't signed up yet.
Okay. Well, John is going to, because John's an early adopter of things, is now going to dive into Twitter. And why are you diving into Twitter, John?
Well, because Twitter has now blocked access for non-subscribers, and because I'm a devoted follower of Tucker Carlson and Tucker on Twitter, now I can't. So now I'm going to have to get an account just so I can listen to Tucker's monologues on Twitter.
Elon made it hard, but it sucked him in. And so, John, here's the thing: when you get on Twitter, and when you make that first post, we're gonna have a lot to say.
Yeah,
we're gonna celebrate the cat. Anyway, so since you're perusing Twitter, the Battelle National Biodefense Institute went viral today because someone who purported to be a former employee of this had a long 20 pages on Reddit today about his experience doing biological research on aliens. And so this is just going everywhere. So after you get done with Tucker, you can read about this guy and how these folks are coming from the aliens are coming from different dimensions and everything about their religion. And it's a bizarre, most likely this guy is just hiring a kite.
Yes.
But anyway, that was the thing that went viral today. So I thought maybe as a new Twitter user, you had seen that today.
No.
Okay. Well, back here on planet Earth, I want to hit briefly on a press release that the governor's office had on the application numbers and the approval numbers for the education savings accounts. Did you see this?
I did. That was incredible.
Yeah. So the application period ended on July 1st, or ended at whenever. And they had initially projected to have 14,000 applications in year one. They ended up with 29,000, over double. And 17,481 were approved. That's a big number.
Yes.
So what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think it proves that Governor Reynolds was right when she stated before even the legislation passed that this is what Iowa families wanted. And the response has been tremendous, and also should be a wake-up call, I think, for public schools that parents are seeking an alternative to what's going on. And so I think, clearly the numbers show that this is a policy that Iowans want and are interested in pursuing.
I think that's right. I think we spend a lot of time in broader numbers, macro trends, and break this down a little bit. So 40% of these applications were either students that had not before been in a private setting last year. So new kindergartners, new switchers, whatever you want to call them. So 40% of the 17, I don't know, whatever number that comes out to, 7, 8, 9,000 7 or 8, I don't know, somewhere in there. But those are kids that will have an opportunity for their what their families think is a better educational setting than they did not have before. So at an individual level, you have a student seeking what they believe is a better opportunity. And that's a really important thing when you drill down to that individual level and a new opportunity that didn't exist before. And it's no secret that I'm a big believer in private Christian education, but I think it's going to become even more and more popular as the years go on.
I agree. Yeah.
Now I saw again on Twitter, John, I saw bandied about some numbers, and we've never been able to lock this number down, but how many open slots are there in Iowa's private K-12 school system for, new students to move into next year? And I've seen numbers somewhere, I think in about the 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 range. But I also suspect that if there's enough demand that these institutions can kind of flex and get a little bit bigger. Yeah. And I also think too that as the years move on, the free market adapts. Mm-hmm. If there is demand for greater number of private school options, the market will adapt to reflect that.
Absolutely.
You'll see schools growing. You'll see satellite schools. You'll see brand new ones popping up out of nowhere. I think you'll see it actually happen pretty quickly. So
yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah,
I think, like I said, parents are wanting a change because of what's going on within the public school system, and so that the ESA numbers just prove that.
Yeah, I think it also too from a political standpoint, it's no secret there were a lot of opponents to the plan, to the whole, and they're still out there. But what you don't see, and I think we've touched on this before, is a lot of direct calls for repeal of it, even from the opponents. And that will get even more and more quiet as the years go on, because it is extremely difficult to take an opportunity away from someone. Yeah. And that's exactly what you'd be doing with that. Nope, sorry.
I mean, you see the scare tactics by some saying that, well, there's no oversight, which I disagree with. And I mean, that's something that the state auditor has said repeatedly, that there's no oversight. So
right. Look, there's opposition to ESAs, but the real outcry is the state auditor's inability to access private financial records of individual families. That's what really gets them animated. Yeah, not the policy behind it. Okay, great. Well, good. I think you'll see those numbers continue to increase and grow, and I think it's just going to be great for a whole lot of Iowa kids. Another quick one, John, just because I got to get this off my chest. Lead story in this morning's Axios Des Moines. Blurry view of COVID-19. So I just want to read this for you and see if you have the same response that I did, okay? The Iowa State Hygienic Lab is receiving too few positive COVID-19 tests to reliably monitor the virus. They're receiving too few positive tests, making it harder for research to detect new strains. Why does this matter? Keeping track of emerging COVID trends can help health officials prevent surges and figure out the most helpful vaccines. So this article is the State Hygienic Lab is lamenting that they're not getting enough COVID positives right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thoughts?
Well, I think this is something we're seeing from the left up and down, whether in Iowa or in other states, and from the bureaucracy of the federal government, that they don't want to let COVID go.
Yeah. We said this at the time. They're gonna ride this as long as they possibly can. And it's just too bad that we're not getting more COVID positives so they can go study more and more vaccines to give us. Yeah. It's just horrible. Yeah. Horrible news. Okay, good. All right. You and I are on the same page on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did, I mentioned this at the outset, you did an interview today on Fox News about Chinese ownership of Iowa farmland. And it's something you've written on in the past. Start off with just kind of the basic premise of what your writing has been about on this issue.
Well, as we know, there's a China has been a concern on many levels, and just one, and specifically this, is dealing with China's increasingly demand to buy American agricultural land. And roughly, this is nationwide. China owns anywhere from between 200,000 to 300,000 acres of agricultural land, and this is either through basically entities that are tied to China or investors that are tied to China.
So it'll be named like the, John Hendrickson Farmland LLC, but it's actually owned by the Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And one thing that's gotten more attention is that the amount of foreign farmland has basically doubled in the last decade, which has raised some red flags, and especially when you have an adversary like China that is trying to buy at resource, because it's not just the land itself, but they're also looking at food processing facilities. And the other thing that's concerning is not necessarily here in Iowa, but in states such as North Dakota and Texas, we see that Chinese investors that are tied closely to the communist government there have in a sense tried to buy agricultural ground close to Air Force bases.
Mm-hmm.
And, for example, in Texas, one said, well, we're just going to put up a solar or a wind power farm. But the question is, what are they really doing? And we know that in February we had the incident with a spy balloon that, and then, it was just reported last month about how China is looking at joining with Cuba for a joint military base and possibly using as a launching pad for more espionage to the United States. And so I think there's a real question about, is it in the national interest for China or any foreign entity to be owning up agricultural land and food processing? And, one thing in Iowa is there is a law. Iowa has a law where no foreign individuals or entities can own land. Iowa does have, I think it's been grandfathered in, some 500,000 acres that are, either controlled by foreign investors or ownership in that regard. But I think there's a push now from both state policymakers and at the federal level, and even our own Senator Joni Ernst has introduced legislation to either outright ban Chinese ownership of land or definitely provide more transparency and oversight over who is purchasing land, who is investing in that. And as I said, Senator Ernst has proposed legislation, and there's some other bills that have been brought forth as well. So I think this is a concern, because if we look at, it would be similar just think if it during the Cold War that, the Soviet Union was buying up agricultural land in the United States, and I don't think that's a good idea. And one thing that COVID did show us is that we are very dependent on not just China but other foreign nations for necessities. For example, pharmaceuticals. Yeah. And it's I think people would be amazed how much of our pharmaceuticals have been outsourced and dependent. What happens if China shuts that off? And should we really give them more leverage over us in terms of food production?
Yeah. Well, I a bunch of things in there. Pharmaceuticals, one, we've talked about that, John, and semiconductors, the other one.
Yes,
if you look at the backlog of new vehicles and equipment, there's you touched on this adversarial relationship that we've sort of fallen into with China, and it's different than maybe in the past. A lot of it is economic.
Yes.
And whereas the Cold War was primarily, a military geostrategic sort of positioning, to global superpowers, a lot of this with the Chinese, the spy balloon, that's straight up espionage. And that's one side of it, or, what maybe tension there might be with regard to Taiwan. But and I don't know. I think it's interesting that, for example, the Chinese are also buying up and controlling shipping ports around the world.
Yeah. Rare minerals as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's these strategic resources, production, infrastructure, those kinds of things. And I think a lot of this is driven by the economics of it. They want those.
Yes.
They want the agricultural products.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to have easier access to trade routes. They want the minerals for their own consumption.
Yes.
And in some sense, okay, I mean, I'd rather have them for America, but these things go to the highest bidder, right? But when those things are key to our own national security, like pharmaceuticals, like shipping and agriculture, which we as Iowans understand is critical to our national security, is in our own national interest. Well, that's where we got to have a policy conversation, is that, okay, well, whoever's got, not everything we have as a country is available to the highest bidder. Mm-hmm. That we need to be able to control some of them. As a resource-rich nation that has fueled our growth and our strength for 247 years, we need those resources for us.
Yeah,
primarily.
I think that's right. And one thing about China is they're trying to establish leverage over not just the United States, but many other countries, because they want people to be independent. They want nations to be independent or dependent on them for necessities. And we sort of allowed this to happen because it was in when we allowed basically China into the WTO and gave them most favored nation status. The argument from people in both political parties was that, China is going to become a responsible global citizen. They're going to play by rules, and they're going to democratize if we open our markets. And the direct opposite happened. And so while we've allowed China to really grow. In fact, if we just look at, for example, China is really expanding their Navy. We're not. I mean, we're not. I think China is outproducing us in terms of ships and submarines, which is very concerning. The other thing is that, and I know, people have differences of opinion on this, but we've been running massive trade deficits with China, and we've lost 4 million jobs to China. And close to 34,000 of that 4 million was just here in Iowa alone. So it has a tremendous impact on what's going on. And I don't think I think that's one lesson from COVID, is that we don't want to be dependent on these foreign, whether it's China or India or any of these.
And John, we've talked about this so many times over the years, and you and I don't exactly land in quite the same spot on this. Close, but a lot of that trade works to the benefit of American consumers by getting access to cheaper goods, whether you buy American or whatever. But the fact is, you can buy more stuff for your kids at Walmart because we don't produce it here. Maybe that's a crude exaggeration, but it does have a benefit to the American consumer, but it also feeds into the trade deficit. And so I get accused of being a little bit of an apologist for at least our relationship with the Chinese. Like, all I want is for it to benefit America. That's the thing, right? And I think to do that, and like you said, and this is where I think we do agree, protect our critical industries so that those benefit Americans. We don't have to worry about where my next dose comes from in times of global conflict, and that the rules are fair. So that goes down to things like intellectual property theft, and the different things that go along with that you talk about with WTO and fair. No, it's just fair. Yeah, everything's above board. But I think coming full circle back, though, to the agricultural issue, is that I think you and I probably agree, and I think a lot of Iowans would agree, that ownership of Iowa farmland is one of those critical national security, national interests, is preserving, at least in large measure, that land.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can always build another processing plant.
Yeah.
and do something else. But that land,
Yeah.
as is famously said, they're not making any more of it.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I tend to agree with you. I think it gets tricky sometimes with some of the constitutional requirements. What do you do with an LLC that's owned partly by a foreign actor? What do you do in those kinds of situations? And it's hard. It can be difficult to track that.
One of the questions that they asked me this morning was because I forget the percentage, but China's on the low end for owning farmland. But I mean,
there's plenty other countries.
There's other countries, and so they said, "Well, what do you do about them?" And I said, "Well, one concern. This is where I think you need more oversight. Is we don't necessarily know who is actually behind that,
right?
Because China's their fingers are everywhere.
Yeah,
and so just because there could be an investor in Canada doesn't mean they're not tied to China somehow, or China's behind that. And so I think these are just good things that you need more oversight and to know who's actually owning these key resources.
I think that's right, and it's just one of those things that sounds great. And we should strive for it. The application of it just gets a little tricky sometimes.
Yes, yeah.
To figure all that out. I mean, give the example of Canada, a Canadian citizen living in America. Mm-hmm. I had a former next door neighbor who was a Canadian citizen.
Yeah.
Could he buy a piece of farmland? I don't know. I mean, he owned the house next door to me.
Yeah.
I don't know, where does that begin and end?
That's right.
And so it's where you draw those lines, and maybe this is just me putting my lawyer hat on. It can get a little dicey sometimes. But
I mean, when one of my favorite issues is steel tariffs, and when those tariffs were put on, a lot of criticism went on the Trump administration because they said, well, that's hurting our allies, that's hurting Canada, but what people didn't understand is that a lot of times when China or other countries dump steel, it could come through Canada and then it's still impacting us. So and the other thing I look at when we look at relations between different nations, whether it's the United States and China or even Canada, all these other countries are formulating policies that are acting in their own national interests. And it's really the United States that is, we're sort of still stuck in this ideology of free market fundamentalism that, we're playing by the rules and everybody else is, and that's not true. I mean, even our allies have been not necessarily dealing fair with us, including the Japanese and even our friends in Europe. And
but they're, no, you're right. It's not unilateral disarmament in the name of free trade doesn't work.
No.
Yeah, and that I think we can definitely agree on.
Yeah.
Well, very good. This is fun. Now, you touched on tariffs there at the end, and I'm still waiting for you to put together our next Hendrickson Conversation series on tariffs. But you got to come to me and tell me when you're ready to go.
Yeah.
And we'll have a whole series on this. But I kind of like the idea of weekend conversations.
Yeah.
Come in Friday, we'll put something together and give the folks something to listen to when they're puttering around over the weekend.
Do we have time for one more topic?
Sure, John. Let's go.
Well, and you and I were talking about this morning, but Wall Street Journal had an interesting editorial that was actually critical of Governor DeSantis, and the Florida legislature passed an immigration law that basically requires Florida businesses that have 25 or more workers to go through E-Verify to confirm the legal status of their workers. And I Wall Street Journal, I often agree with them, but on immigration, I don't. And so I think what Governor DeSantis did was really a good law. I mean, it cracks down on illegal immigration, but the Journal, they're trying to take the governor to task because they claim that it's going to hurt businesses and it's going to hurt workers there, and also it's going to drive people away from the state. And I just disagree with that. And I think it's good to have not just border security, but actually having a system like E-Verify. And the other thing the Journal says, well, it's going to, states need immigrants in order to fuel job growth. And I certainly disagree with that. And I mean, there's open debate between conservatives on that, but But in this case, I think Governor Ron DeSantis has really done a good job on that immigration front.
Yeah, immigration is one of those issues that on the editorial pages of our nation's newspapers, there's the pro-immigration side and maybe in the Chamber of Commerce types.
Yes.
And you don't, but you don't get a lot of messaging on the other side of that issue.
No.
But yet, inevitably, it comes back around as a political issue.
Yes.
Because, look at 2016, build the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the reasons that Donald Trump got elected president, because
that's right.
Guess what? The American people, or a good chunk of them, wanted to hear a message on immigration.
Yeah.
And so it's not a loser. I think it's one of those ones that the intellectual establishment would have you believe that there's really only one right answer on immigration, which is bring them all in.
Yeah.
And yet that's just not where the people are. There's a disconnect that. And so politicians aren't going to lose on taking a conservative stand on immigration.
Well, the Wall Street Journal, the editorial takes the governor to task, saying that, and they're saying, they quote DeSantis arguing that this bill will combat Biden's border crisis. Then they basically said that's not going to be so. But I would disagree, because there's only so much a governor can do.
That's right.
And what DeSantis is doing is protecting his own state, and you and I have to follow laws, and why shouldn't everyone else? I mean, that's one thing about immigration, is that you need to have a system that respects the rule of law, and that means businesses too. Right,
except for the actual security of the border itself, in which case we can forget about the law.
Yeah,
but, So, look, it's again, there's no question that our economy has the capacity to take on a lot more workers, and maybe by extension we need more workers. But there's open borders has got to be one of the least attractive policy solutions available to us.
Yeah,
because,
I agree.
If nothing else, we got a ton of people that just aren't even in the workforce.
Yes, yeah.
And so we could start there. But so yes, and I think too is so you have let's take the DeSantis in Florida situation as an example. Well, it's not fair to block these people from coming in, or whatever it is, right? And it's not fair to force employers to use E-Verify. That's unfair. But the situation at the border, it's a humanitarian crisis. Where's the fairness in that?
That's right.
To create a system where you make it attractive for these folks to make this dangerous trek, and that's not fair either. And I think in these balancing of concerns, I think we really lose sight of what's actually happening on the ground down there. And in my mind, I've always separated the sort of the where should we be on immigration? Mm-hmm. What's the right policy? Yeah. Who comes in, who doesn't? Because obviously we need it. We're open to immigration in this country. We always have been. So clearly you have that on one end. But I don't understand how, even if you want a lot of immigration, how you cannot be in favor of border security. Yeah. I can't understand how we have to turn the security of our border into a political issue. It escapes me.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. But but there's a lot of special interests that want it the other way, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, good. Or not good, but it's a good issue for us to talk about.
That's right.
All right, good. You got big plans this weekend?
I don't. No.
Okay, good. Me either. It's great. I gotta put up a new basketball hoop this weekend. I'm dreading it.
Yeah.
So, but the things we do.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for our weekend conversation here with John Hendrickson, and hopefully this will turn into another one of our recurring series, and he's going to dazzle us one of these days on tariffs.
Yes, yeah,
it's going to be great.
I'm sure that's going to be a record-breaking episode.
I'm sure it will be too. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Give us a 5-star review. Tell your friends, and anything else you can do to help us get this message out to Iowans. So with that, on behalf of John Hendrickson, we will see you next time on ITR Live.